Hello everyone, my name is Delaney Keenan and I'm the Curatorial Assistant here at the Worcester Art Museum. Today I'm going to show you some of my favorite works in our current special exhibition, Rembrandt, Etchings from the Museum Boijmans Van Beuningen in Rotterdam, the Netherlands. Today I'm going to talk about 4 self-portraits Rembrandt did in print, which are in our exhibition. And as an art historian of the 17th century, something that always has captivated me about Rembrandt is his continual return to the self-portrait and this real innovative impulse to use his own face as a site of experimentation and manipulation. Rembrandt created self-portraits throughout his life, from his earliest career in Leiden to the height of his career in Amsterdam. And I really see this continual practice of the self-portrait as really part of his autobiography. Today I want to start with this first self-portrait, which you may call a self-portrait but also a double portrait, of Rembrandt and his wife Saskia, dated to 1636. This self-portrait I always find to be really fascinating, in part because of the gaze. Rembrandt looks out with these real piercing eyes, and really it feels like he's looking right at you. But in reality, he's actually looking at himself, because this self-portrait was created using a mirror. It's really interesting actually, because Rembrandt and Saskia, while this print was created in the 17th century, they're actually wearing clothing from a century prior, from the 16th century, and they're really fashioning themselves in this historical mode, which is continued in the pictorial composition itself. Rembrandt rests his arm right at the front of the foreground here, almost like as if his arm was resting on a ledge. And this is actually a pictorial device which was very common in the Italian Renaissance, and popularized in portraits by the greats like Titian and Raphael. Here, Rembrandt is also holding in his hand a tool for creating art. He may be holding some kind of stylus or pen, either creating an etching or a drawing. And it's quite fascinating that he's capturing himself in this moment of artistic creation, which is something he actually did multiple times in his career. But something I find fascinating about Rembrandt is he's using himself over and over again, wearing different types of clothing, costumes, accessories, but also different facial expressions. And in the next print I'm going to show you, we'll really see that up close and in detail, where Rembrandt begins with himself as the model, but then manipulates his own image. So here we have Self-Portrait with Plumed Hat from 1634. This is an example of a print in which Rembrandt used his own face and his image as the starting point, but not very precisely. He ends up manipulating the image so it becomes much more of a generalized image of a man with curly hair and a plumed hat. What's particularly fascinating about this work is the fact that we actually know there are 3 states of this print, in which between the different states Rembrandt had the ability and the chance to really rework the composition. We know that the first state of this print was actually much larger, and it was a man standing up until about the knee length with one hand on a saber. In the second state, Rembrandt drastically cut down the composition and created this oval framing device. And it's really interesting to me that Rembrandt uses himself as the beginning, but then changes it. And it really fits into this long tradition in the history of 17th century Dutch art of the tronie. Tronies were types of portraits that weren't necessarily portraits. They were really studies in different facial expressions, which then an artist could use in much larger. It's fascinating how Rembrandt really began with himself as the model, but used himself truly as a model, which one can manipulate and change in different contexts. So it really evolves from a traditional self-portrait to this more abstract image of a generalized man with curly hair and a plumed hat. The idea of fashioning oneself can also be seen in the next print I'm going to show you, in which Rembrandt is really dressing himself in a very specific mode. Here in Rembrandt's self-portrait with raised saber, also dated to 1634, we see the artist here depicting himself as an Eastern prince. It's a self-portrait in which he's wearing a really wonderful hat with an ostrich feather, a fur collar with chain, and holding in his hand what appears to be an Indonesian dagger, which would have been used as both a weapon and a spiritual object. Rembrandt takes himself as the model, particularly his face, hair, and those same piercing eyes, using himself to really study different types of clothing and people who he could have depicted in his paintings. We know, for example, if you zoom in, that he was able to achieve with just line such detail that you can really see almost every little hair of that fur around his collar. Every little detail of his mustache and the hair on his head, even his eyebrows, which are furrowed. And I think it's so fascinating that Rembrandt used his own face really to understand the topography of the human face. I really encourage close looking on this print. Finally, I'm going to talk about the fourth Rembrandt self-portrait in this exhibition and return to the topic of Rembrandt's hats. Self-portrait with cap pulled forward, dated to about 1630. I really love this little image in which Rembrandt is combining etching and his signature dry point technique. We know that this print was something that Rembrandt continually returned to. He made 10 different states of this print where he reworked the plates between the different states. It's amazing to think of Rembrandt adding small details and additional lines in both etching and going into the plate with the dry point needle to create this image. Specifically in this image, Rembrandt is wearing a hat once again, and the cap is pulled forward in which there's a shadow falling across his face that's really wonderful. Rembrandt would often use himself, again, to really explore these different types of facial expressions and shadows, but also explore hats. I often like to think that Rembrandt had quite the collection of headgear, because in the vast majority of his self-portraits, he's actually wearing different types of hats. It's kind of amazing to think of Rembrandt and his closet of hats. Here, the cap really serves as a device which challenges the artist to depict shadow in different ways. It's really, really wonderful. And again, it's one that close looking is really encouraged because of its really small size. It's really not much larger than a postage stamp. In this specific print, we see Rembrandt really in his young 20s when he's still living in the city of Leiden, about 25 miles southwest of Amsterdam. I often think that these small-scale self-portraits really capture the personality of Rembrandt, the artist. And I think he was always thinking about the place of the artist in the history of art. And it's actually quite fascinating that a number of his self-portraits in print throughout his career were not just images for himself, but were actually sold on the market and were something that were popular among collectors. It's fascinating how Rembrandt continued to use himself and document himself throughout his entire career. And really, it's almost like the precursor to the modern-day selfie, documenting yourself in different places, times, expressions, moods, really everything. Rembrandt loved to capture himself. The curatorial department is proud to have this vast collection of Rembrandt etchings, as well as 3 drawings and 1 copper plate, which really spans Rembrandt's career, from works created in the very earliest part of his life when he was not yet 20 years old, to etchings created in the last decade of his life before his death in 1669. I hope you'll visit us and come face to face with the artist himself. Please visit us on our website for additional information, and of course, follow us on social media for more. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you here in Worcester.